Okay, hopefully this video that you will see is of some sort of help for you to review. Yes, I'm not dressed up. I'm very informal because I'm at my house. So, sometimes it's better to be relaxed and to not be sitting in a classroom and worry about what do I need to know about civics. So, number one, I'm not an expert. I'm a teacher. In a sense, that does maybe make you an expert in some respects, but in others, you're still learning. So, what I'm going to do is create videos for each unit in civics, which is now technically called American History, the founding principles, civics and economics, but we're going to simplify it and just call it civics. So, if you can get past my country sounding voice and my informal appearance, hopefully these videos will be a decent review. Now, I do have, notes. I have a trusty iPad that occasionally I'm going to have to keep putting in the password to keep it up and running, because if you go to Pitt County Schools website, you'll see that there are some more or less guidelines for what teachers are supposed to teach in civics. And if you go under the heading staff and you click on PCS curriculum guides, and if you look at that page, you'll eventually, if you scroll up the page, you'll see that civics is there, and it's got it as first marking period, second marking period, and third marking period. So what we're doing is looking at the units, and we're going to start off with Unit 1. And I'm going to try to keep these videos very quick, to the point, what do you need to know, and that's it. And hopefully not tell too many side stories. So, let's start off with Unit 1, which is nothing more but an introduction to civics. Civics is about citizenship. It's about, civic duty, civic responsibility. It's about the necessity of voting, the power of voting, the necessity of government, the structure of government. So let's start off by just simply saying, if you have any level of common sense, you can survive this course. Because it's not like world history. It's not like American History 1 and 2. It is really based on function, structure. It's based on how things are intended to work, how they actually work, and maybe how we can fix it. So, let's start off by just looking at Unit 1. And Unit 1, if you happen to have, not necessarily an iPad, but something that you can look on the internet, you can see that with the first marking period, they want us to know certain things. Well, if we go to the curriculum guide, it looks sort of something like this. And if you go to the year at a glance, it breaks things up into units. So for the first unit, it's talking about, or the heading that they've created, is government, colonies, and revolution. Now, we don't really cover the colonial period in civics because that's something that American history covers. We do get a little bit of world history from this unit because it talks about the Enlightenment period, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. But in Unit 1, we're looking at basically all the things that led up to the American Revolution, the after results of the American Revolution, how the Enlightenment assisted us in wanting to revolt from the British, and then, of course, how we have developed our national identity. We don't have nationalism because, we're too diverse for that. But we do have something called patriotism, which is, pretty close to nationalism. So, let's talk a little bit about Unit 1. And pretty much what I have here is, slides from your notes that I posted on your class page. And unfortunately, if you did not join the class page, you'll have a tough time seeing these videos because that's where the videos will be posted, will be on the class page. So, first thing we want to do is, number one, just talk about the types of government and the levels of government in this country before we talk about all the pre-American Revolution stuff. So, levels of government. Well, there's 3 levels. NSL. I like acronyms because sometimes it helps us remember what they mean, what they represent. So, for NSL, it's national, top of the food chain, state level of government, middle child, middle of the food chain, and then local government, the newbie, the first child. Well, not the first child, but the most recent child. So we're going from level of importance: national, state, and local. Pretty simple concept, just something you need to know to get started. So, what type of governments are there out there? Well, let's just focus on this government in this country. We are a Republican form of government. So what does that mean? It basically means we're a representative democracy, which means we elect people to represent us. Whether that's electing a member of the House of Representatives, President, Governor, North Carolina Council of State, North Carolina judges. When we elect these individuals, they are there to represent us. And of course, there are certain criteria for them to serve in that position in terms of office, length of office. But we'll get into that much later when we get into future unit reviews. So what types of governments are there besides what we have here in America? Well, there's other types of democracies. We have also a direct democracy. A direct democracy is a democracy where the people vote firsthand. They participate firsthand. So where can we find a direct democracy in, say, the United States of America? Well, town hall meetings. You can also see that in a village circumstance, such as the village of Simpson, would be more of a closer, at least local version of maybe what a direct democracy would look like. We tend to prefer representative democracy because we don't want to get our hands dirty. So we elect people who are experts to represent us. And of course they come from various parties, the two major parties being the Democrats and Republicans. So, beyond just a democracy, representative or direct, what else is out there democratic-wise? Well, we also have things such as a constitutional monarchy, the UK. They have a constitution. It is not really a written constitution necessarily. It's based on various documents such as the English Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, so on and so forth. They also have a royal family. But the royal family has very little influence over the government because Parliament, the Prime Minister, political parties in that country make the decisions. But a constitutional monarchy is an example of a democracy. What else do we have? Well, things that are not democratic, such as a dictatorship, where you have one person controlling the government. An example would be, say, for instance, the circumstance in Cuba. Communist nation, Fidel Castro, now his brother Raul, is taking over the country. It is technically a dictatorship. One person controlling the government. Then we have totalitarian states. Well, they're a really extreme version of a dictatorship. So you could look at North Korea, Kim Jong-un. You can look at, in history, Adolf Hitler, the Nazi regime. They controlled all aspects of life in that country. They control the media, the schools, what you were going to say or what you're even thinking about saying, because what you could have said could have gotten you in trouble in a totalitarian state. You could also utilize the reference to Joseph Stalin, leader of the former Soviet Union. With the Great Purge, probably anywhere between 15-20 million plus people were killed or imprisoned during that totalitarian regime. So, you're wondering, which type of government's the best? Well, it depends on where you live and what you're used to. We're a democracy, we prefer a democracy, and unless we get taken over by some communist country, we're going to remain a democracy. So, what are some things that make up a democracy? Rule of law. No one's above the law, not even the president. He has to follow rules like everyone else. Limited government. That means that we don't want the government to infringe upon our daily lives. We want to be able to make our own decisions without looking over our shoulder to see what the government's going to say or how they're going to react. Then, of course, we have consent of the governed, i.e. voting. Voting is really crucial because there have been times in our history where people didn't have access to voting rights. People were denied the opportunity to vote. If you were a minority, African American specifically, you didn't have voting power for a long time because, well, you were considered slaves during the time period in which slavery existed in this country. You also notice that women couldn't vote for the longest time. I mean, it's not until 1920 that a woman was allowed to officially vote with the 19th Amendment. So voting is a right, it is a privilege. It's also a civic responsibility. You don't have to do it, but you should. Personal opinion there. Individual rights. We promote and protect individual rights. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that with the next unit, because we'll be looking at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and some ways to remember some of the more important constitutional amendments that, well, you could see on the final exam, or, well, you just need to know in general. Then, of course, the notion of a representative government goes back to representative democracy, voting, being able to voice your concerns, your right to petition government, your right to peacefully assemble and protest. If you don't like what your representatives are doing, you have that ability because a constitution that creates this notion of democracy allows for that to happen. Then majority rule. It's very simple. One more than half, 51%. If the majority of the representatives think that we should have this measure passed, this piece of legislation passed, then certainly it's going to pass. Of course, there's a lot more complexities in that process, but just to sort of give you a notion of what is majority rule from the government's perspective. From us is voting, so that if candidate A gets 57% of the vote, he has the majority support of the people. And that is important in this country. We don't have a multi-party system as you find in some European countries where they need, a coalition to form because no one gets a majority. We pretty much have the two-party system, and we can safely assume one party will control the majority, whether it is controlling the seats in the House and the Senate or the White House itself, the presidency. So majority rule is very important. So we get past preliminary stuff. Let's focus on, well, the not so preliminary stuff, the historical things that you find in civics. So what are some things that are important to us historically? The Enlightenment period, the Enlightenment thinkers. So how can I remember these people? Because there are a lot of them, but there's only some key ones that you need to really remember. So let's look at the notion of a social contract. We get the social contract idea from John Locke, an Englishman, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who is French. Of course, I didn't say that in a French accent because I'm not French and my accent is not very good. So, what is a social contract? In essence, it means this. In order to truly be free in society, you have to give up certain freedoms. We don't have bang bang shoot 'em up Wild West mentality in this country. You can't do anything and everything that you want to do. There are limitations. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That is not protected First Amendment speech. I cannot own a surface-to-air missile, even though the Second Amendment says I have a right to bear arms. There are limitations to freedom, and that's the social contract. The moment you step in the school building, we have a right to search your locker, which no one uses. But we can search your bags. When I say we, administration, a safety resource officer, your right to privacy is not being violated there. Why? Because the moment you step on government property, the school, your rights are restricted. Why? Social contract. Everyone else's rights are more important than your individual rights. So, beyond social contract, natural rights. John Locke, life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson will take this notion and put it in the Declaration of Independence. However, he makes a little bit of a change. We'll get to that later. So, besides natural rights, social contract, First Amendment, freedom of speech. Voltaire, a Frenchman, that's not his real name. He used it as a name to protect his identity so he didn't get in trouble with the French government. What does he say? You should be able to speak your mind. And in essence, he makes a quotation that we may or may not know if it existed. I do not agree with a word that you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That's the First Amendment. Remember, rights have to be given to all or no one. You can't just handpick who you want to have rights. You yourself have to make the decision to agree to disagree. That's the only way this country can fully work with individual rights and protecting of individual rights. So what do we need to know about the colonial period other than, maybe these Enlightenment thinkers? Not much. But we should mention this, though, with the Enlightenment period, and Lord knows I've almost forgotten the most key aspect of the Enlightenment period in relationship to American government. Separation of powers. Baron de Montesquieu, another Frenchman. He believed that the best type of government is a government in which you separate the authority and the powers of government, i.e. what we have today. Legislative branch, they make the law. Executive, they enforce the law, they carry out the law, they execute the law, whichever verb you feel more comfortable with. And then, of course, the judicial branch, they interpret the law. Or another way to look at that, they are the defenders of the constitutional rights by which we all freely use and probably just don't know exactly what they are. We'll get to that much later again. So, colonial period, nothing really to worry about. And if you see me looking down, I'm looking at the notes, and you're welcome to obviously have those in front of you, print them out, look at them on a computer as maybe you're watching this, whatever works best for you. So, what do we notice during the colonial period? Well, some good things and bad things. Slavery, bad. Became an accepted institution based on the agricultural needs of, well, next to free labor. So we see that primarily in the South. There are slaves in the North, just not as many as in the South because of the agricultural prosperity and just the good climate for agriculture. We do see education becoming very important. The very first universities are being formed during the colonial period. We also see spiritual awakening with various religious beliefs, Baptists, Methodists, become very powerful in this country. The need for religion, the need for guidance happens with the colonists. The Puritans, who take it to another extreme, they see the devil everywhere, which leads to the Salem witch trials, and not exactly a bright spot in colonial history. As far as family life is concerned, I mean, if you lived in the city, you had resources, it was a vibrant area, women probably had a little bit more freedom working outside the home, living in the city versus living out in the agricultural regions, because if you lived out on the farm, lived out in the country, everyone just simply worked the land, women, men, and children. So, why didn't we stay loyal to the British? Why didn't we recognize the Queen's authority today versus the King's authority back then? Is because we wanted independence. It's sort of like you being a teenager. You want to break free from your family, from your parents' rules and regulations. Unfortunately, once you become an adult, you realize that life isn't quite that easy. We're finding that out in this country. So, what are some things that led up to this moment of wanting to gain independence from the British? Well, just those taxes. The Tea Act, the Sugar Act, the Intolerable Acts, the Declaratory Acts, taxes on paper, on glass, on stamps, taxes. We hated the notion of having to pay all these taxes to someone across the Atlantic Ocean, and then when it came time for them to recognize our needs and concerns, they're not listening. They just want the taxes. So, we formed a group called the Sons of Liberty. Very small group, and by definition, they're terrorists. They do things such as the Boston Tea Party, where they dumped over 200 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. We see the Boston Massacre. A lot of things happening in Boston because, well, it was a hotbed for trade because of the ports there in that region. And with the Boston Massacre, we have some colonists that get shot and killed. Obviously, I'm not speaking very good English. You've been in the classroom with me. You realize you can accept that. We're good. So, taxes, Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party. We see the famous cartoon from Benjamin Franklin, the snake that's divided up into parts. United we stand, divided we fall. The notion of join or die, the Albany Plan of the Union, which was back in 1754, before any of this other stuff happens, and we just get tired of it. We get tired of British rule. So with the First Continental Congress, delegates from the colonies met and drafted a letter. They sent it to King George III. We basically just told him to back off, rescind some of those taxes, give us some more representation in Parliament, and we'll stay British. Didn't work. The king sent more troops over to this part of the world. Things got a lot worse, which led to the Second Continental Congress. It was during this time that we eventually drafted the Declaration of Independence. Written by not just Thomas Jefferson, although he gets the most credit. Benjamin Franklin also assisted. John Adams, Philip Livingston. But Jefferson pretty